Climate change is not just an environmental problem that requires technical fixes to capture more carbon or farm more productively. It is a social issue which women's organizations and feminist movements are tackling at the grassroots level.
My understanding of the climate crisis is a global phenomenon. It is inescapably global despite my people's sustainable customs and environmental conscience. The crisis still deeply affects us. I also understand that the crisis originates in human activity outside of my territory. Although we did not create the crisis, it is our responsibility to mitigate its damage because we rely on the environment, our forests, and our rivers for our livelihoods.
The impact of climate change has particular dire circumstances for those who are poor and women. In Antigua and Barbuda, we have a large percentage of female-headed households. And so when they're compromised, it puts a lot of women and families at risk. The project is empowering women economically through climate-smart, sustainable livelihoods. And there were very few women involved in beekeeping. And what we wanted to do was increase the number of women. And what we certainly learned through this project is that it wasn't about women's lack of capacity or lack of interest, but lack of access. So we put out the call, and for the project, we expected, like 30, and we got over 100 women applying.
The role of women is central to sustainable forest management. It has improved already. The production systems are highly feminized now, but the ownership and decision-making remains very minimum for women. This project aims to transform women's role of access and control over forest resources and forest-based businesses, engaging them in policy dialogues to ensure provisions that secure women's representation and leadership to address unequal power structure in overall forestry management.
It was a hydroelectric dam that was being built in Isquisis, which is a locality in Guatemala where there are mostly indigenous people. There were no specific measures to prevent, avoid, or mitigate the impacts to this woman. And there were no proper participation processes to include the woman to make the project better. We cannot afford to continue using scarce funds in ways that do not favor local communities and the environment. Not only because it's an open violation to human rights, obviously, but because it's a serious mismanagement of scarce and much needed financial resources.
We all had this wake-up call that in 2017, the OECD found out that only 0.5% of ODA was reaching women in their organizations directly.
The current framework for accessing climate finance is complicated, tedious, and does not take into account the wisdom and knowledge of those who work in the grassroots.
Women have a lot of knowledge to provide towards the best solutions that we need. So it is not only women that lose when they are excluded, everybody does.
Donors can simplify how climate finance is being made accessible to women. Funds should be channeled directly to regional women's organizations instead of through national authorities.
Capacity building and knowledge sharing is extremely important to allow women-led organizations to navigate the system and to provide them with the necessary expertise to qualify for climate finance.
It is sometimes hard to manage multiple small locally based programs, and we really just want to go to locally based programs. We work a lot with the multilateral institutions and large climate funds. And there is an element of efficiency there, but we also should really focus on making sure that this is a locally led adaptation.
This is where women's funds and intermediary funders come in. We can connect government donors and large foundations to grassroots women-led organizations on the front lines of the climate action struggle.
Although climate finance cannot be said to be gender just today, there have been clear improvements, and this is a reason to celebrate and to build upon what we already have.
We believe that women, girls specifically, who often act as stewards of natural resources, also hold critical expertise and knowledge. For this reason, Global Green Grants is committed to funding this intersection. Today, 60% of our funding goes to women-led and focused on organizations and movements.
We put resources directly in the hands of these organizations because we know they are best placed to advance solutions that fit their needs as they tackle the climate crisis and the myriad inequalities that ripple from it. These organizations address the root causes of the climate crisis, like patriarchy, colonialism, and the unequal distribution of power.
What we have done is that we have a so-called Power of Voices grant program. And what we're trying to do is to give, to have local ownership and also to give a strong voice to Southern organizations that we see as stakeholders. We were able to set up this global alliance for green and gender action. So we're basically supporting over 400 grassroots groups and really trying to bring across that global collective power that they can have and to combine the women's rights and the environmental justice together.
Very recently, Canada announced a new initiative to fund projects from civil society, indigenous and other organizations to support climate adaptation in the global south. And this will include a $20 million specifically allocated for advancing women's rights and climate change adaptation in sub-Saharan Africa.
Another promising initiative is the Global Alliance for Sustainable Feminist Movements, a multi-stakeholder initiative that came out of the Generation Equality Forum and that will be launched in June. It aims to generate more support for women's organizations and feminist movements.
Any strategy that claims to adapt or mitigate climate change but does not include women-led organizations and feminist movements will be neither sustainable nor effective and may instead perpetuate and increase gender inequalities.
It is increasingly evident that to save our planet, we must move beyond words and take action. And one of the ways to do this is by supporting communities on the front line of the climate crisis.